Hey guys, I'm Lou and welcome to my January wrap up. In January, I read 25 books. I keep on saying this, but I read more this month than I did in the entirety of 2024. Without further ado, let's get into this video because it's going to be a long one. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. The first book that I read in January was How to Survive Your Murder by Danielle Valentine. It is a young adult horror murder mystery thriller. It's like Groundhog Day meets Final Girl. On Halloween, Alice witnesses her sister Claire get murdered. In the years since her death, Alice has seen her life fall apart. Her parents divorced, her friends have become more like acquaintances, and her dreams of becoming a forensic pathologist quickly evaporated. On the 1-year anniversary of Claire's death, the murder trial starts with the murderer pleading not guilty. Whilst Alice emotionally prepares to testify and provide the key evidence to convict the murderer, Alice gets knocked out and wakes up on Halloween, 1 year before, with her sister very much alive. Determined to save her, Alice will do anything to protect Claire. I discovered this author just by scrolling through my library app. The last book that I read in 2024 was Two Sides to Every Murder by the same author. That was their latest release and I really liked that book. I liked that book so much that I decided to read the author's backlist, and this was the only other book, so this is the author's debut and it was available to borrow right away, so I did and I read it. I dedicate my reignited love for reading and my comeback to booktube because of this author, because I also did really like this book and I think that is what pulled me out of my reading slump. It did take me a while to read, but once I got into it, I was really into it. And I ended up finishing this book within a few sittings. The story starts to pick up when Alice gets sent back to the past, and you get really gripped, you just can't stop reading. You want to know if Alice can save her sister, or if it's just a predetermined fate that they can't avoid. And then you as the reader and then Alice as the character start questioning whether or not it's really worth changing the past. Due to the horror aspect, there was quite a few twists and turns that I did not expect. So I did really enjoy being surprised. Because this story is a horror, there can be paranormal elements, and so my suspension of disbelief was a lot higher than if this was just a normal murder mystery thriller book. Maybe I need to read more horror books, but like horror books without gore. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I would recommend it, but I just wouldn't read it again. This book is very much a one-read story. You can pick this book up again, but knowing the twists and turns would make this second read less enjoyable. I'm really happy picking this book up from the library and finding a new author that I like to read. If you're looking for a horror, paranormal, murder mystery thriller book, this is right up your alley. The second book that I read in January was The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. It's an adult horror mystery thriller book. This book follows Jiwon as her life is falling apart. Her father left her mother and now Jiwon is left to pick up the pieces and help support her mother and her younger sister. When her mother tells her that eating the eyes of a fish can bring you good luck and maybe even bring your dad back, Jiwon tries one and immediately becomes obsessed with eyes. She starts dreaming about eyes, human eyes, and eating them. Jiwon's mother eventually moves on to a man called George, a white man with yellow fever and definitely a passport bro. Jiwon starts to become obsessed with his blue eyes and wants to satisfy her desire to eat them. This book is very well written. I was incredibly grossed out reading this book. I kept on needing breaks to stop feeling so unsettled. I had to like put my book down multiple times and just had to like sit in silence, decompress, and then pick it up and read again. I think this book legit gave me a nightmare. For the plot of this book, it felt like a lot happened, but also not a lot happened. In the beginning, it just feels like a medium to talk about social discourse and family values, especially because divorce is such a taboo subject in Korean culture. But it was the fact that the dad left. Not only was he the breadwinner of the family, but he cuts social and financial ties to the family. So the first part of the book, a lot of it was discussing family values. When George gets introduced to the story, that is when Ji-won starts to really spiral downward. Up until that point, you as the reader don't really know where the plot actually is going. And then you start to get invested as to what will happen next. This book is short and sweet as it's just shy of 300 pages. Despite my breaks, I did manage to read this book in one day, and that was when I realized perhaps I am actually out of my reading slump, a reading slump that I've been in for 3 years. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars and I would recommend it. Just be prepared to be creeped out. I think this book is the most I've ever been creeped out by a book. It's always Korean writers too. The last time I felt this creeped out was The Vegetarian by Han Gong, and that's not even a horror book. The next thing that I read was Breeding the Nanny by Darcy Rose. It is an erotica novella that is available on Kindle Unlimited. The plot of this book is exactly how the title sounds, so I won't go into detail. I picked it up just because Amazon Unlimited recommended it to me, and I was like, why not? I need to make my money worth it. Okay, it wasn't like a scam, but it was low-key a scam because there was a deal on offer where you pay 3 months of Kindle Unlimited for 99 pence, and so I did that, but then I got charged twice because there was something wrong with my internet. So I ended up paying for 3 months at 99p and then an extra 3 months for the full price. And so like that was not what I wanted. Even though I contacted Amazon for a refund, they were like, you already have like 3 months of membership, we don't know what you're talking about. But on my account you can see that I have 6 months of membership, not 3. And so I was just like, I gave up. I was just like, fine, I'll just have to make sure that it's worth the money. So you'll see that I went on a huge Kindle Unlimited reading spree. It was like 60,000 won. So I needed to make sure that I read enough books for it to cover that cost, to make sure that it was worth it. Especially because I didn't know how long I would be able to read like this for. I had to make sure that it wasn't a fluke, and so I needed to make sure it was worth all my money, and so I read books like this. Despite the whole book being spice, I'd only give it like a 3 out of 5 in terms of spice level. The novella is barely 30 pages, and I feel like I've read better spice in romantasy novels, but that's probably why I got recommended this book on Kindle Unlimited. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Read it if you have Kindle Unlimited, don't if it's not your cup of tea, but definitely don't buy it if you haven't got Kindle Unlimited because it's not worth that cost. The next book that I read is The Seven by Robin Delvey. It's a British murder mystery crime thriller. It's a debut book that was published in January 2025 and it is available on Kindle Unlimited. The Seven follows Crown prosecution lawyer Evie Wren. So she's a government criminal lawyer. Evie Wren recently left private law after she unearthed corruption within the law firm, which resulted in her being fired, so she had no choice but to work for the government. Because of her good morals that she's shown, she gets assigned the biggest case in British history for decades. Cult leader Patrick Nye and his followers, known as the Seven, pleaded not guilty to detonating a bomb at a theatre in London, killing hundreds of people. It's Evie's job to look through the evidence and find the truth. But the trial has already begun and Evie is running out of time. If this book wasn't available on Kindle Unlimited and wasn't a recent release, I don't think I would have picked this book up. But I'm glad I did. I like police procedural books, and so I was intrigued to read it from a point of view of a lawyer. I did enjoy this book and I read it in one sitting. It feels like a BBC drama, a bit like Line of Duty, just lawyers. I think the best selling point of this book is the plot. It has a lot of twists and turns and I wasn't able to predict them. Plus the pacing of this book is consistently fast. so I was invested to see what would happen next and how the case would resolve itself. But I would say that the ending ends in more of a fizzle than a bang. You're left feeling like, is this it? However, the book does provide closure, and it is the start of a series, it appears. I would continue on with the series, but I don't think it would be a high priority read for me. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I would recommend it. I really enjoyed this book because it is set in London, and so it gave me a lot of feelings of nostalgia. The next thing that I read is Rosie and the Dreamboat by Sally Thorne. It's a short story that's available not only on Kindle Unlimited, but if you have that subscription service, then it will give you the Audible audiobook. So I listened to this book on audiobook, and I would recommend that you read it this way. Rosie and the Dreamboat surprisingly follows Rosie. Rosie and her sister are at a spa enjoying a Galentine's Day. However, Rosie gets stuck in a flotation device, and a firefighter comes to save her. I really liked this short story. It's such a cute read. It's a short story of purely just romance, no spice, and it does a really good job in telling a fully fledged story in just 50 pages. I wish this book was a full novel. I would love to read it. This short story felt more solid than some of the 300-400 page romance books that I've read. Likeable characters, character development, backstory, all within 50 pages. It's incredible. I gave this story 5 out of 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this short story, and I would definitely reread it and recommend it. The next thing that I read is The Breeding Clinic by Isla Quinn. It's another short story that Kindle Unlimited recommended to me, and I was like, why not? It's really short. It's less than 30 pages, and it's exactly how the title describes it to be, so I won't go into further detail. I liked it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Would I recommend it? Perhaps not. The next one is Her Last Move by John Mars. It's a UK police procedural crime murder mystery thriller book. It follows D.S. Becca Vincent, who has just landed the biggest case of her career that could make or break her. With the help of police super recognizer, yes, that is an actual job description, Joe Russell, she aims to catch an elusive killer, but the murderer is watching her every move. This book is available on Kindle Unlimited, and I'm glad it was, because I don't think I would have picked this book up otherwise. I was still in my phase of trying to find anything that sounded remotely interesting to make my money worth the Kindle Unlimited subscription, so I am glad I came across this book, and it was actually a good one. I low-key forced myself to pick this book up, and I'm glad I did, because I was so invested in this book. I read it in one day in 2 sittings. The first half of this book is like a very average police procedural. I was a bit bored, and I did lose my focus quite easily, but after the halfway mark, that's when the plot starts to get really good. The pacing picks up, and there's so many twists and turns that I did not expect. I would say that this book defies the normal police procedural norms. There is a really massive twist in this book, and I was so shook. I had to like constantly read it. I was like, wait, no. Like, what just happened? I had to read it, I think maybe like 2 or 3 times to be like, oh they really went there. The plot is definitely the best part of the book, hands down, but the characters were also good. I felt like they were quite fleshed out, like we saw their flaws and we saw what makes them tick. The ending also gives closure with no loose ends. At least with no loose ends that I saw. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend it, but perhaps pick up the audiobook for the first half. If you're looking for a good murder mystery thriller that will surprise you, this is the book. I say this as a person who is very good at predicting twists and turns. This book will surprise you. The next book that I read is I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This is her celebrity memoir from her childhood until her adulthood with a narcissistic mother. I've been wanting to read this book ever since that it came out, so when I finally got back into reading, I looked on my library app and they actually had the audiobook available, and so I would definitely recommend that you guys pick up the audiobook because it's read by Jeanette herself. You get to hear the emotion in her voice and actually hear her story be put into spoken word, and I think that makes her story even that much more powerful. When I was a child, I used to love watching her on iCarly. Hearing as an adult just how much she had to endure was very painful and heartbreaking as a fan of hers. My heart hurts for the struggles that she had to go through, and I wish her nothing but happiness and health. I hope that she gains everything that she wants in life, and I do hope that this book provided Jeanette with closure. It does feel incredibly weird to rate her memoir, her life story, but I did give it 5 out of 5 stars. It's an incredibly profound book into the life of being a child star. It was told incredibly well. I definitely do recommend this book, especially if you're a fan of her, a fan of iCarly, or are intrigued about the life of child stars. But it is an incredibly hard read. There is abuse from her narcissistic mother in the forms of both mental and physical abuse, and a lot of talk on eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia and alcoholism. The next book that I read was a reread of The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenzeller. It's a young adult romance fantasy book. It follows Alessandra. Alessandra is tired of being overlooked, so she just has a 3-step plan to gain power. Number 1, woo the Shadow King. 2, marry him. 3, murder him and take the kingdom for herself. However, some say that the Shadow King can command the shadows to do his bidding. Others say the shadows speak to him, whispering the thoughts of his enemies. And Alessandra is not the only one trying to kill the king. Can she keep him alive long enough for him to make her his queen? All while struggling not to lose her heart? After all, who better for a shadow king than a cunning queen? This book is one of my all-time favorite books. I've reread this book like 3 or 4 times. I've listened to the audiobook. This time I reread the physical book. I actually bought the physical book again in Korea. I have bought this book like 5 times. I wanted to reread this book so I could read the following companion book because I hadn't read that one before. I really love this book. It's such a fun read. I always have so much fun rereading the book. This is a book where I think you enjoy even more on rereads. I think had this book been published post-COVID, it would have been massive. I think it's a book ahead of its time. The plot is interesting and has you hooked from the start. You really do become invested in Alessandra. She is a really witty character and you cannot help but root for her, and the romance is so enjoyable. You see them start as a relationship of convenience to friends to lovers, and the Shadow King is the biggest simp. By the end of the book, he would sacrifice anything for her, and I love that kind of love. This book is unsurprisingly a 5 out of 5 stars. I recommend both the audiobook and the physical book, and I never get tired of this book. So the next book that I read is the companion book to The Shadows Between Us, called The Darkness Within Us by Trisha Levenzeller. It follows Alessandra's sister Chrysantha after the events of The Shadows Between Us. Chrysantha Santhos hides her intelligence behind a mask of being a dumb-witted girl, and she has found herself to become a wealthy widowed duchess. However, before she can enjoy her newfound freedom, a man called Erix, who claims to be the Duke's estranged grandson, turns up to inherit everything that should be rightfully hers. Determined to take back what is rightfully hers, Chrysantha wants him dead. This was the first time that I read the companion book and I really enjoyed it. I liked seeing what happened to the kingdom after the events of The Shadows Between Us. This book develops on the relationship between Alessandra and Chrysantha. You don't get to see that in the first book because they're more like enemies. So I really enjoyed seeing that development. This book will 100% grip you with the first sentence. Do you want to know what it is? My husband is taking too long to die. How does that not make you want to read on? In the first book, you either don't like Chrysantha or you don't really care about her. But I think the author does a really good job in making you care about her quite quickly. You develop an attachment because she is just so relatable in wanting to have peace and freedom away from men. Chrysantha also has really good banter and clapbacks. Like this quote: "What duty could be more important than caring for my husband? Your knightly duty. the Duke clarifies. It's daytime husband. Like, the sass is top notch in this universe. The plot of this story is primarily the romance between Chrysantha and Eryx. It's a hate to love romance. This book is first and foremost a love story. I liked the events that propelled the love story. I also really loved seeing the cameos of the characters in the shadows between us. I liked the way that it was done because it made it feel like this book, The Darkness Within Us, was a whole singular book within itself. I think that you could read this book without reading the shadows between us. You would just be losing out on the nostalgia of the cameos, but there's more than enough information about the universe given for you to understand what's happening. Overall, I give this book 5 out of 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would definitely recommend it, and I think I would probably read it again. It's a 5 out of 5 star read for me just because of how much I enjoyed it. If you had to make me compare to The Shadows Between Us, I would say that The Shadows Between Us is the better book, but I also do acknowledge that it's an all-time favorite book to me, and so it's incredibly hard for me to compare a book from my all-time favorites to a book that I just read. I know that it can't compare, so I'm not going to compare it. Despite that, it's still an incredibly enjoyable read, and I would recommend it. I do think that this series is seriously slept on. Next, I read The Best Girls by Min Jin Lee, the author behind Pachinko. I do want to do a whole video about this book, hopefully, so I don't want to go into too many details in this wrap up. It's a 20-page short story that follows a girl from a big family in Seoul in the 1980s. I think this book provides a lot of good insight into Korean culture and provides a good demonstration of the Korean patriarchal society. And you can see just how much Korean society really hasn't changed since the 1980s, even though it's a fictional book. To me, it's on par with Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam-jo. It's an absolutely fascinating read with a really jaw-dropping twist at the very end that will definitely have you reeling in your seats. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I read it on Kindle Unlimited. The next book that I read is The Good Samaritan by John Mars. It's a mystery thriller book. There is a service called End of the Line, and it's very much like Samaritans. It's a place where you call when you're feeling down, and they listen and they don't judge. However, Laura does the opposite. She manipulates these vulnerable people, and instead of helping them, she encourages their mental illnesses and end up convincing people to end their own lives. She craves this fix. However, Ryan is onto her. His wife and unborn baby died because of her words. Holding hands with an unknown man, and Ryan is determined to get to the truth and get revenge no matter the cost. This was another Kindle Unlimited read. To me, this book was like a hate read. I didn't enjoy reading this book. I didn't like the characters, but I just could not stop reading. I had to know what happened next. Now, this book is dark, filled so much with the horrors that humans can do to each other. I don't think this book will make you feel depressed, but if you're not in a good mental state, I would recommend holding off this book until you are in a good state. If you're along for the ride, no matter how dark it gets, then I would definitely recommend you reading it. The first 50% of the book tells the same story twice, once from Laura's point of view and once from Ryan's. As a result of this, the plot can feel a bit slow. You already know what's happening. However, when the two timelines meet, that's where things really start to kick off. The pacing increases and they both start getting revenge on each other. As a reader, I think most people support Ryan more than Laura, but both of them are bad. Laura more than Ryan. Both of them are willing to do anything, regardless of their moral compass, to get revenge. There is no real good person in this situation, because even Ryan does things that he shouldn't. He does cross the line. As for Laura, it's interesting from her perspective because she is a unreliable narrator. You sense that early on. I actually correctly identified her personality disorders, so I feel very happy about that. One of the things that I enjoy about John Mars' writing is that his books have a lot of twists and turns that are not predictable. I liked being surprised, and this book surprised me. This is the second book of his that I've read that has a good shock value that's believable. So now I need to expect the unexpected when I read a John Marrs book. And that ending, whilst I didn't find satisfaction because the story didn't end how I wanted it to, I still enjoyed the ending. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. It's a very good thriller. I would recommend this book. You probably won't enjoy it, but you would be invested in it. You will want to read this book until the very last page. The next audiobook that I listened to is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This book gives me general fiction vibes, but it is a murder mystery thriller. It follows 4 septuagenarians, I had to practice saying that word, in a retirement village that has a murder club. They attempt to solve unsolved crimes when a local developer is found dead with a mysterious photograph left next to the body. The Thursday Murder Club suddenly find themselves in the middle of their first real-life case. I borrowed this book from the library and I'm so glad I did, because this book was not for me. I heard about this book on BookTube. I think it was a lot of people's favorites. I also have heard a lot of hype around We Solve Murders, so I ended up looking at the availability for both books, and this book was available to listen straight away, so I borrowed it, I read it. Kind of wish I didn't. I was listening to the audiobook whilst doing my nails, so it wasn't even like I was paying this book full attention, and I still didn't like it. If I had bought this book with my own money, I would have been even more disappointed. I honestly think that if I didn't read this book as an audiobook, I would not have finished this book. I think it would put me in a reading slump. I pushed through half of this book by listening to the audiobook on ×3 speed. This book is very much, the concept sounds better than the execution. The execution was extremely lacking, and a lot of this book was boring. There was murders and I was bored. This book is primarily written in third person, with the exception of Joyce's diary entries being the only first person insight. Whenever I read third person books, I always have a disconnect between the characters. There's always a distance between me and the characters when third person is involved. On top of that, the characters felt like they were the backbone of the story, but I felt disconnected to them, and they didn't feel developed. If anything, I feel like they were caricatures. The plot of this book, whilst surprising at times, was also lacking. Outside of the murders and the revelations, which was few and far between, the pacing was slow. I also felt like sometimes the twists and turns made little sense. I think this book would have been better if it was shorter. Overall, I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars. I do wonder if it's a case of the book is not for me. Maybe I'm overly critical because I am British, and a lot of the people that I see that love this book are American. Maybe my suspension of disbelief is lower than theirs, and so they can enjoy it whilst I hate it. I don't think I would continue on with this series, but if I do, I would definitely read it by audiobook. I will definitely give Richard Osman more chances because I think this is his debut fiction novel. I do hope that I'll enjoy future novels that I will read from him. I would definitely not read this book again though. Next is Listen for the Lie by Amy Tintera. It's a murder mystery thriller that follows Lucy, a popular true crime podcast created by a man called Ben, had just released a series following the murder of Lucy's best friend Savvy, and Lucy is the prime suspect in that murder. But Lucy has amnesia from that night, and there's not enough evidence to convict Lucy. When the episodes get released, Lucy sees her life being upended and she has to return back to her hometown, back to where her best friend was murdered. She has to face her demons and discover the truth on whether or not she actually killed her best friend. I bought this book because it was on sale on the Kindle store and the premise seemed interesting, but I didn't fully look into it after buying it because I had bought a lot of ebooks at the same time back when I was not reading books. Later, as I was getting back into watching BookTube again and I was watching videos to gain inspiration to read and what book to pick up next, I saw a video where Books and Lala had recently read this book and she talked about it in her videos. It sounded so interesting, so I had to immediately pick it up from my TBR, and I'm very happy that I did. I do want to note that I read this book on Kindle, and I have heard that the audiobook is very well produced, so maybe next time I'll reread it that way. This book is told in two perspectives, from Lucy's point of view and from the podcast, where it's written like a script. This narrative made the book incredibly addicting to read. Not only did I want to uncover the mystery, but I desperately wanted to see what Ben would say in his latest episodes, because his podcast is releasing as the story progresses. The start of this book is immaculate and you just can't help but read. It immediately draws you in. I ended up reading this book in just 2 sittings. I just could not put it down. The only thing that got in its way was sleep. The writing of this book is exquisite. Listen for the Lie is genuinely funny. I laughed out loud twice and I'm so glad there was no one around me. I grew to care a lot about Lucy and Ben, and I was desperately hoping that Lucy wasn't the killer throughout the book. The plot of this book is well crafted. There was quite a lot of twists that had me grasping for my non-existent pearls. However, the twists were not just done for the surprise effect. I think they were done really well and really believable, which I appreciated. The pacing was also consistent and slowly increasing as you read further on. So by the time you get to the end of the book, you don't realize you've read over 400 pages. I did like the romance and I do support it, but I'm also not sure if I believe it, simply because Lucy being suspected of murder should put off any potential romantic interests. Then there's the matter of professionalism. Would a true creator of the podcast initiate relations with the subject? I don't know. It was messy, but it was believable, just incredibly human in the messiest way. But this book is not spicy. Overall, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. As a consumer of true crime and podcasts and thrillers, I love the fact that these combined in this book. I would highly recommend Listen for the Lie, and I definitely think I would read it again. I'd be open to reading it again, despite me knowing all the twists and turns. I enjoyed being in this book world, and I desperately hoped that there would be a sequel, but I know there wouldn't be, but I just wish I could see the characters again. The next book that I finally finished is The Prisoner's Throne by Holly Black. It's book 2 in the Stolen Heir duology, which is a companion series to the Folk of the Air series. I started the audiobook on the 24th of March 2024. I finished this book on the 15th of January 2025. Talk about a long read. It's really hard to summarize this book without spoiling 4 other books. But I also think you wouldn't pick up this book unless you had read those previous 4 books. So I'm not going to summarize this book, I'm just going to talk about my feelings. This review is mainly for people who have read the Folk of the Air series. If you've read the Folk of the Air and you want to know if you should continue, my recommendation is don't. Save your time and read something else, but I am heavily biased against this book. It's incredibly hard not to compare it to the Folk of the Air series, but like that series is just so much better. This book is just so incredibly lacking. This series is incredibly lacking. So the first book is called The Stolen Heir, and that finishes on a cliffhanger. So I was really excited to continue on with this book, and so I pre-ordered it, and I started this book close after release day. But the thing is that the cliffhanger got resolved really quickly, and so that was where I put down this book, because I just really wasn't that invested, and I only had like an hour and 15 minutes left of the audiobook. I actually forgot that I needed to finish this book until I started to get back into reading again, and so I ended up pushing through this book on 3 times speed simply to finish it and to rate it. I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars. I really wanted to enjoy this book, but I just really struggled to connect to the characters, so I ended up not caring about the plot. I finished this book to log it, not because I wanted to see what was happening, because I honestly stopped caring. I can honestly say I don't know if I'll read more books in this series and this universe, and that is really such a hard thing for me to say, because I absolutely love the Folk of the Air series and I have reread that multiple times, but this series is just not it. I would not recommend this duology unless you are intrigued to see what happens, but even then, like, not much happens. You'd be fine not to read it. The next audiobook that I listened to was Twisted Love by Anna Huang. It's a very spicy romance book. Twisted Love follows Ava and Alex. Alex's best friend Josh is Ava's older brother. Josh goes on a Doctors Without Borders retreat for a year and gets Alex to promise to look after Ava, and Alex reluctantly agrees. Ava is the sunshine and Alex is the grumpy. Alex has his own mysterious, dangerous past that puts him on a course of revenge, but perhaps Ava might change that course. I own the ebook, the physical book, and the audiobook. I do recommend listening to the audiobook because it is well narrated with 2 characters. It can just be unnerving listening to all the spice in your ears. I really enjoyed the beginning of this book. I was hooked. The only time I had to take breaks was when the spice was getting too much. I read this book in one sitting. I think the first 60% of this book is really good. It's not Shakespeare and the plot is predictable. Well, at least I easily predicted it. But this book is like a comfort read that's spicy. However, after the big plot revelation, I feel like this book loses a bit of its magic. I think if this book was about 100 pages shorter, it would have been a better book and could have possibly been a 5-star read. Communication and trust is a problem that the couple face, and I don't like how the plot around that developed. I really liked the characters. I loved Ava and Alex. Yes, I like Alex despite him being a massive red flag and his possessiveness. Both of the characters are flawed, but who isn't? And I appreciate the fact that Alex is very upfront about his red flags, which is refreshing. It would suck to be Ava and having Alex be possessive over any man that comes nearby, but I'm not Ava. I really like Ava's personality and I do love grumpy characters. It does help that Alex is rich and would do anything for Ava. I liked Ava first and I warmed up to Alex. Overall, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I will be continuing on with this series and I would definitely be open to rereading this book. I would recommend it if you like flawed romances and spicy books. There is slight representation in this book as well, with Ava's background being Chinese American, but it's not a huge part of the story. The next book that I listened to is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. It's a, can you guess it? Murder mystery thriller book. The Maidens follows Mariana, who is a group psychologist who has been struggling with the death of her husband for over a year. One evening, her niece Zoe calls her distressed about her friend, who has been murdered in Cambridge, England. Now that Mariana has no one left, she rushes to Zoe's aid. Whilst haunted by the memories of her life with her husband, Mariana is determined to figure out who is behind the murder. I liked The Silent Patient by the same author, and so I was intrigued by The Maidens, but maybe I should have read a different book instead. This book was average, only because I listened to the audiobook. If I had physically read this book, my rating would probably be lower. I probably would have DNF'd this book. It probably would have put me in a reading slump just because of how like mid it was. The main selling point of this book is the plot. The only really good part of the plot happens at the end of the book with all of the revelations. Up until that point, despite all the twists and turns, it doesn't feel high stakes despite the fact students were dropping like flies. I think this is because of how Mariana was written. If I was being nice, I could say that the disconnect Mariana has with the murders is because of her own disconnect with life, dealing with her grief, but I don't know if that was truly the case. Am I being too nice to the author? But I am not being nice when I say that I don't think Mariana was written with that intention. I just think that the character of Mariana is defined purely by her grief. Apart from her grief, I didn't understand her character and her motivations beyond helping Zoe. But then you could say because of her grief, Mariana doesn't have any motivations beyond Zoe and her patients. And I think a lot of my negative feelings stem from me not liking this book and not liking any of the characters. I wanted to figure out what happened next and I ended up reading the book on 3.25 speed just to push through the story. If you enjoy The Silent Patient, there is a cameo in this book. Overall, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I wouldn't recommend this book, nor would I reread it. In fact, this actually puts me off the author because this book deals with a lot of ancient Greek mythology because Mariana is half Greek and there are some scenes that are set in Greece. She was born there and she immigrated to the UK. However, a lot of this book felt like the author was showing off their knowledge and literature in general rather than integrating it well into the story. It didn't feel woven in. It almost felt like reading a academic essay and putting footnotes and references. It felt to me like Betty didn't know this quote from this story, from this classic. But I also feel like perhaps I just didn't like the academia setting of Cambridge. This story didn't really leave a mark for me. So I do think I will forget about this story rather quickly. The next 3 audiobooks that I read are from the Themis Files by Sylvain Neuvel, which are Sleeping Giants, Waking Gods and Only Human. So I finished that whole series. This is a sci-fi dystopian series. I'm going to give the summary of Sleeping Giants and then I'll talk about the books individually without any spoilers. So Sleeping Giants follows a cast of characters, but one of the main ones is called Rose. When Rose was a little girl, she fell onto a gigantic metal hand that was buried in the ground. 17 years later, she is in charge of the scientific team uncovering the mysteries of the hand, attempting to find its origins and perhaps trying to find out if it's a part of a body. But will this discovery lead to lasting peace or be a weapon of mass destruction? This book was big on BookTube back in the day. This book was published in 2016. I really liked it and then I got my dad into the series, but he ended up finishing the other 2 books and then he told me they were disappointing and so they went quite low onto my TBR. But I had a few hours to spare because I was doing my nails and I own Sleeping Giants on Audible, so I borrowed Waking Gods and Only Human from the library and decided to read them because it was only about 3 hours per book. When I first read Sleeping Giants in 2018, I really loved it and I rated this book 5 out of 5 stars, but rereading it, the rating went down to 3 out of 5 stars. This book doesn't have good rereadability, especially if you have a good memory and you remember all the twists and turns. I did, so I saw a lot more of the plot holes the second time around. However, Sleeping Giants is so much better than Waking Gods and Only Human. The series takes a massive shift from sci-fi into dystopian. Whilst I know the author can do whatever they want to their series, but everything that I loved about Sleeping Giants was not present in the other 2 books. It almost felt like completely different books and series. If anything, it evolved to something that I didn't want to read. But I finished both books because I wanted to see how it would end. But even that was disappointing. This series does not provide good closure and I was so mad with how it ended. So I would recommend Sleeping Giants to fans of the sci-fi genre, but I would tell people not to continue. So my reread of Sleeping Giants gave me the rating of 3 out of 5 stars and Waking Gods and Only Human also had 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is The Most Wonderful Crime of the Year by Ali Carter. 2 rival American murder mystery writers get invited to spend Christmas in the rural and isolated English countryside by a famous author. British weather occurs. Surprise, surprise. A murder takes place. Heavy on the romantic comedy with a splash of murder mystery, this book was a ton of fun. I had read from this author before. I really like the way that she writes. This book sounded perfect to me and it was available on Kindle Unlimited. This book is just so much fun. I'd classify this book more of a romance and less of a murder mystery, but the 2 work well hand in hand in this book. There's tropes present like enemies to lovers, falls first and harder, forced close proximity. It was the chef's kiss. I do love the romance, but it's not spicy. It's more like Fade to Black, but I think that works better considering the circumstances. I don't see this as a bad thing, but take this as a warning if you are expecting spice. The plot was very entertaining and gripping. It follows a lot of crime tropes, but not in a cliche way because the characters are authors, so they are the ones that bring up the tropes. It adds a layer of believability. This book is written in 3rd person with alternating chapters from the 2 writers in the past and a police interview happening in the present. So there's a lot of layers to peel back. The police interview provides a lot of foreshadowing and then you are gripped and along for the ride because you want to see how that will play out. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend it. It's just shy of 300 pages, so it's a short read. If you have a lot of free time, then you could probably read this in one sitting. It's a lot of fun and it fits the Christmas/winter vibes very well. If you are a mood reader, I would definitely read this book when there's snow outside. I think I would definitely reread this book again, even though I know the mystery. I like the romance enough to read it again. I just don't know if I would enjoy it the same amount. The next book that I read is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This is spoiler free, so don't worry. This is the third book in the Empyrean series. The first book is called Fourth Wing and the second book is called Iron Flame. This series is basically set in Dragon Rider College. It's like Divergent meets How to Train Your Dragon meets horny young adults. The series follows Violet as she attempts to survive the threshing and helps to be worthy of being a dragon rider through finishing the trials. I feel like this book created the romantasy genre. There's romance and it's definitely spicy. This is the first time I'm talking about Fourth Wing on my channel, and I do want to say that I love Fourth Wing and I did not like Iron Flame. To me that felt like a filler book, but I didn't mind Onyx Storm. It was better than Iron Flame and I'm intrigued to see what happens next. In terms of just thinking about Onyx Storm, I think this book should have been shorter. There was a lot of plot developments that just didn't add to the general story or add substance to the series. I don't like the spicy scenes in this series. It's just so cringy to read the characters be like, mine. That was repeated way too much. Also, plot problems for the characters from Iron Flame continued to be a problem in Onyx Storm. I just feel like the main characters should have graduated by book 3, especially considering how much they've gone through. Like, school rules being a problem really annoyed me. I do have a really detailed and spoiler-free review of Onyx Storm that I'll link down below if you want more of my specific thoughts. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars, but that is a rating based on how much I enjoyed the book versus how much it was well written. The second to last book that I read in January was The Getaway by Nicola Martin. The cover looks good, doesn't it? But there's that famous saying, like, what's it? Oh, I think I've forgotten it. Oh, don't judge a book by its cover. The Getaway follows Lola, who is escaping her mysterious past in Hong Kong to become the new manager of a private Caribbean island. Paradise to rich guests. Her old boss, Moxham, got her the job and is the boss on the island. But barely a day into her arrival, Moxham is found dead. With no one to trust, Lola has to be prepared for anything. I borrowed this book from the library, and already from the beginning I had a problem. Before even starting this book, the publisher must have given the library a PDF scan of this book. So it's not a normal ebook file, so you couldn't adjust the size of the words, nor could you adjust the backing, so you couldn't make it like black page and white writing. You had to read it white with black text. So it made it incredibly annoying to read. I have a really old Kindle that I use to read all of my library ebooks, but because my Kindle was so old, it couldn't read the PDF scan, and so I had to only read it on my phone. It was just such an annoying experience because I had to like double tap to like zoom in, and I had to do that for every page. I had to zoom in just the right amount for the text to cover my phone. I made a TikTok describing how annoying it is, and I'll include it in this video now. So I borrowed a book from Libby. It's a library app and you can download up to like 7 audiobooks and ebooks like separately, so you could have up to 14 books at one time. And so I chose this book. It's called The Getaway by Nicola Martin. Like, it seemed cool, like I love the cover, and so I downloaded it and I started reading. It's not formatted well. Like, it's formatted like a PDF scan, and so I'm having a really hard time reading it because, like, I'll show you. I mean, like, is this not really hard to read? Like, is it just me? Is it like the fact that my eyes aren't good? But it's really annoying because you have to like zoom in to read. And what I love about Libby is that Libby makes things more accessible to people, especially to people who might have impairments. And I just really don't like the way that it's formatted, and I wish that it wasn't like a PDF scan and like you could actually like change the size of the font. That would be nice. Go and follow me on there. So excluding that mess, this book is nothing like you would expect it to be. I don't really know how to start this review without sounding mean, but don't read this book. It's boring. Spend your time reading something else. This book is described almost like a whodunit on a private island, with many suspects, from the staff to the rich guests. Instead, it reads like those boring old spy books set during the Cold War, in the sense that like nothing really happens and it feels all for naught. Instead of it being like a murder mystery thriller, it reads more like how to run a private island with personal baggage. Plus, we barely meet Moxham, the murder victim, and it's not a spoiler because it's in the summary. We know he's going to die. As a reader, you end up not caring about him because he's hardly in the book when he's alive. When he was alive, he spent most of his time avoiding Lola. Like, how can you, as a reader, care for someone who just is hardly there? Why should I care? Especially considering none of the other characters in this book are likable either. Neither are they relatable. Plus, the characters are hypocrites. They like to say they're going to do one thing and then they go and do the other thing a page later. They'll give warnings but won't listen to their own warnings the next page. I also felt like Lola was way too quick to trust people in a murder mystery book. I also felt like she had a hero complex. She was out here trying to solve the murder mystery and not let anyone else die, but putting herself in very clear danger while she was doing it. To me, this book felt like a first draft before an editor reviews it, because the last 100 or so pages were actually decent. But because the characters lacked development and I didn't like them or related to them in any way, I was not invested what happened to them, but I wanted to know what happened next. Like, I didn't care who lived or died or who really was the bad guy. I just wanted this book to end. Overall, I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars because it is readable. I finished it. I wish I didn't start it in the first place. The cover just looked too good, so don't be fooled like me. The final book that I read in January was Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. This book follows a mother called Laurel. Her youngest daughter went missing when she was 15 years old. 15 years later, a man comes sweeping her off her feet with a 10-year-old daughter that looks eerily like her missing daughter when she was younger. This book is hard for me to rate. I think the plot of this book is like a 2.5 star read because I knew most of the twists before they came up. I feel like if you are knowledgeable about true crime cases, then the plot of this book would not surprise you. It's a very predictable book, at least for me. Only 2 things happened I didn't expect, but those were very minor twists. However, I felt like this book was executed well enough to be rated a 3 out of 5 star read. I wasn't hate reading it, and I genuinely wanted to know how the book finished. The main problem was that I didn't connect with the characters, but I'm not entirely sure if you're meant to. Even the main character Laurel, though I think that's because she's so deep in her grief and she's the main point of view that we are reading. So it would make a sense why there was a disconnect to every other character. So this book is either done incredibly well or just not done well at all. I think it's the former. However, I do rate my books based on my enjoyment, and that's why I'm sticking with a 3-star rating. There are multiple points of view of this book. I didn't mind the multiple points of view, but the perpetrator's point of view made the story a lot less fun. It just gave everything away on a plate. This book was a very average read, and I'm not sure if I would recommend it, but if you want to pick up this book, I definitely wouldn't stop you. I think I will forget about this story rather quickly, and I wouldn't reread this book. I think a lot of the hype around this book comes from people who don't normally really read murder mystery thrillers, or they don't consume true crime, because this book just felt too predictable to me. So if you are a person who doesn't consume true crime or a lot of murder mystery thrillers, then this book would be one for you. But people like me who are veterans to the genre would probably see this more as an average read. And so that's it. If you've stuck around until now, thank you so much. This is one of the downsides to reading so many books in a month. You have to talk about all of them. Please do give me some book recommendations in the comments below. If you have anything that you think that I would enjoy. Have you read any of these books? Do you want to now? Do you not want to? Like always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel, and I hope to see you guys again soon. Bye.